Now, there have now been over 10 million reported cases of coronavirus worldwide.
25 million cases.
Cases surpassed 100 million.
Wildfires are scorching the West Coast, leaving behind a path of death and destruction.
There have been violent scenes across the United States in response to the death of a black man, George Floyd.
You can see police here now firing tear gas into the crowd.
We need action from everyone, everywhere. 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they are the blueprint for success.
17 ambitious goals, determined by governments of over 180 countries around the world with an agenda around sustainability. For the last several years, Global Opportunities and Threats Oxford, or GOTO, and Map the System have used the Sustainable Development Goals as a guiding frame for students around the world to explore the most pressing social and environmental problems of our time. This is where GOTO and Map the System participants come in. Our goal is to leverage the creativity and intellectual firepower of a global community of student changemakers to develop actionable systemic change ideas for a world in crisis. This year, both programmes focus on 4 grand challenges related to COVID-19 and its ripple effects. Far more than a public health emergency, the pandemic has triggered an economic crisis, widening inequality and a long overdue reckoning on deeply rooted systemic racial injustice. Meanwhile, extreme weather events signal the increasing urgency of our unfolding climate crisis. These challenges predated the pandemic, but COVID-19 amplified our vulnerabilities and exposed the fragility of our systems.
We have the ability to rise above our limitations. Always remember that the will to change is itself a renewable resource.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Peter.
Good to see your faces. Thanks for making this time. How's everyone doing? If we can just take a minute first about how you're adjusting to I guess you call it the new normal.
Oh, I have to remind you as well that this is being recorded.
For the camera crew.
For the camera crew.
Whilst we may all long for a return to normality after months of loss and sacrifice, is back to normal really what we want? This rupture, as Arundhati Roy tells us, means we can't go back to how things were. We can only pass through the portal from one world to the next. We need to seize this moment to reimagine our world and redesign our systems. We need a reset. A year from the start of this pandemic, student teams across the world began doing just that, mapping out our health, climate, economic and social systems. They are unlocking insights for deep change. Our interdependencies with people and the planet must be understood. This doesn't call for individual heroes, but for coalitions of actors to collaborate for change. This is the mindset students adopt in GOTO and Map the System. At the GOTO Summit in May and Map the System Global Final in June, we'll showcase the most promising change ideas in 2 exciting pitch competitions. We'll see how the best teams from Oxford and around the world have reimagined systems for a more just and equitable future.
Hello, and from Oxford, greetings and welcome to the 2021 Oxford GOTO Summit. I'm Peter Drobak, Director of the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship and course leader for the GOTO program.
And I'm Zainab Kaba, Associate Director for Programs here at the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship, where we also run GOTO's global sister program, Map the System. So a special welcome to our Map the System teams and educators from around the world, as well as all of our Oxford students and alumni, faculty, and global partners.
GOTO stands for Global Opportunities and Threats Oxford. The program is an integral part of the Oxford MBA, preparing leaders to address world-scale problems with a systems thinking approach. In GOTO and in Map the System, which runs in over 60 universities around the world, students are asked to think differently about social and environmental challenges. Working in teams, students use deep systems exploration to understand the root causes of the world's most pressing problems, unlocking novel change ideas. Each year we have a go-to theme. It's usually centered around one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Over the past 8 years, students have built on their go-to projects and gone on to create meaningful change. They've created ventures that address transportation systems in African megacities, catalyze a shift towards sustainable fashion, and much more. Others have influenced policy. But all students, we hope, leave GOTO with a systems thinking toolkit that prepares them to address complex 21st century challenges. This year, our theme is a bit different. As you heard in the video, we felt both a sense of urgency and really a sense of heightened responsibility and ambition to address all of the systemic crises that we're facing, that were triggered by the pandemic. And so students have been working across 4 challenges: health reset, climate reset, economic reset, and social reset. And we saw an extraordinary breadth of projects spanning all 17 SDGs and really every corner of the globe. It should be noted that our students accomplished all this under extraordinary challenges. With the University of Oxford's physical doors closed for much of the past year, students were scattered all over the world in lockdown and had to collaborate remotely on their go-to projects. They had difficulty accessing some of the stakeholders and communities relevant to their projects. So the work you'll see today, which is just a small sample of the 63 go-to projects, is a real testament to their extraordinary efforts. Now, we've got an exciting event lined up for you today. In addition to a pitch competition featuring 4 of the most outstanding go-to projects, we'll hear from President of the World Bank, Dr. Yong Kim.
Thanks, Peter. So throughout today's event, we'll also invite all of you from the audience to contribute to today's proceedings. We also have an audience choice vote for our finalist teams. You will also have the opportunity to put questions to our keynote speaker. So with that, let's start off a bit with the icebreaker to explore the theme of the summit. So we'll be using menti.com for this process. So if you'd like to participate, please go to menti.com. You will be asked to put in a code. That code is 5773-9565, and then press submit. So the first question we'd like to ask you today, in line with the systems reset theme, over the last 15 months, what would you say is the one thing that has given you cause for optimism? So we'll be able to see the feedback from the audience in a word cloud. Again, menti.com, and you can use the code 5773-9565. And while we wait for that to come up, Peter, what has given you optimism over the last 15 months?
Maybe it sounds too obvious, but our amazing students and actually all the hard work they've put into this, and really seeing a rising generation that is so much more worldly and knowledgeable and committed than I was at that age, is what really gives me hope.
That's great.
How about you?
I've been just really amazed that people are not deterred by all of the challenges that we have and still continue to press on despite everything that's going on. So that is given me a cause for hope and optimism. Okay.
I'm sure the audience will have much better answers than I had.
Okay, do we have any results just yet? Okay, so we have some results coming in. We see that the vaccine is giving people cause for hope, which totally makes sense given where we are in the pandemic. Empathy, that is really great to see that people are understanding what others are going through and what things might be like for them that are different for others. Family has come up, which is really great to see. And I see some smaller things there like collaboration and innovation and a bit of connection and friends. So there are a lot of things around relationships and understanding relationships with one another. So that is quite encouraging. So Peter, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you. And we're going to meet our judges in just a moment. I just want to tell you a bit about the pitch competition. So we had a panel of faculty that selected 4 outstanding finalist teams from amongst the 63 teams that represent the entire Oxford MBA class. Each team will have 7 minutes to pitch followed by a 5-minute question and answer period with our judges. As you'll see, the projects are intentionally problem focused rather than solutions focused. We're looking for teams to convey a deep understanding of the system their problem is embedded in, elevating the perspectives of different stakeholders and using systems maps. They should explore the landscape of existing solutions before proposing their own systemic change ideas. Judges will be looking at the depth of research, quality of presentation, and the potential impact of proposed interventions. There are real stakes with today's competition. There's actually a total of £12,500 in prize money to be awarded to these teams today, including an audience award. So all of you are judges, pay attention. And also the coveted, that's very heavy, GOTO trophy. So nothing short of immortalization is ahead. Zainab, back over to you.
Great. So with that, I think it's time for us to be introduced to our judges. So I will start with we have 4 judges today. I'll start first with Dr. Yong Kim, who will also be our keynote speaker at today's event. Dr. Kim is Vice Chairman and Partner of Global Infrastructure Partners, a fund that invests in infrastructure and projects across several sectors around the world. He has served as the 12th president of the World Bank Group, where he championed the audacious goal of ending extreme poverty by 2030 through a focus on boosting prosperity for the world's poorest. A physician and an anthropologist by training, Dr. Kim previously served as the president of Dartmouth College and held professorships at Harvard Medical School and the Harvard School of Public Health. From 2003 to 2005, he was director of the World Health Organization's HIV/AIDS department and led the 3x5 initiative, the first ever global goal for AIDS treatment, which helped to expand access to antiviral medication in developing countries. In 1987, Dr. Kim also co-founded Partners in Health, a nonprofit medical organization that now works in poor communities on 4 continents. Dr. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. If I can ask you, what has given you cause for optimism over the last 15 months?
Well, Zainab and Peter, thank you so much for having me on. I think that one, the vaccine development has been just tremendous. I agree that that's a source of great optimism. The other thing is this. I think that what's happened is that now the world sees that the solidarity is critical for survival. I mean, the country, and look, not all the countries did this on the basis of, the countries that did well on the basis of democratic solidarity. I'm not being naive about that. On the other hand, a very strong sense of responsibility to others and belonging to a society. We've seen that has differentiated the places that have done well and the places that have done not so well. And so I hope that we can have that discussion. What is it going to mean to really use these vaccines for everyone on Earth? Now, I have to tell you that, at the same time that I'm so optimistic about the vaccines, I'm concerned about getting them to Africa, to getting them to all parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia. This is a huge challenge for us. And so solidarity has been spotlighted, and now it's a huge challenge for the world going forward. My own sense is that unless we get a lot better at it, we're not going to come out of this, the COVID era anytime soon.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Kim. I'm hoping that we can hear much more on your thoughts on that during your keynote. Our second judge is Teresa Chen. Teresa is a Senior Director for Evaluation and Learning at the Skoll Foundation. Her work focuses on generating thoughtful program analysis and linking learning to strategy and actions. Ms. Chen has a long history of research and evaluation, both domestically in the US and in international contexts in organizations such as Room to Read, the KIPP Foundation, the United States Government for Accountability Office, and the Institute for Financial Management and Research in India. Welcome, Teresa. Optimism for you, where is it found?
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. When I first thought of this question, my answer went right away to my toddler, who is about 2.5 years old. And it might just be because it's early here in California where I live, and he's just woken up. And if you can hear a toddler screaming, that's actually him. It's saying hello to y'all. But I had to think a little bit deeper about why does that bring me optimism in the time that we're in? And I think it's for two reasons. One is that the pandemic has introduced all these new great ways of connecting, right? And I think about how my son is growing up in California, but he has grandparents on one side in Taiwan and another one in India, another side in India, and we brought them all together on a Zoom birthday call, the kind of thing that we never would have done before the pandemic, but now it just seems like an everyday kind of thing. So that's like my personal life, but in my work life, the Skull World Forum, which is typically held in Oxford, and is a great, amazing event that you may all have heard about and hopefully attended in our virtual version. Well, one reason that so many people could attend this year and this last year was because we were forced to pivot to a virtual format. And that allowed us to have a much broader reach than we typically can. There are some actual physical space constraints with holding things in Oxford. So by going virtual, we opened up the platform and increased accessibility, increased the diversity of speakers, and just brought a very rich dynamic pace to the conversation. And so that's one thing that I think about as that my kid reminds me of just being able to connect in different ways. And the other thing that he reminds me of is his future, the world that he'll grow up in. I think the pandemic has laid bare, I mean, everyone says this, right? It's laid bare all the problems that have really been beneath the surface, but it's made a lot of us think about the things that we actually have to deal with, but that maybe we don't talk about so much. And I'm thinking specifically about here in the States, racial inequities, the way that it's come to the surface and that the country is coming together and addressing it is pretty amazing. And that we had to deal with governance issues, and that now we have the first woman in the White House and a woman of color and a multiracial woman at that is all pretty amazing. So the world, I'm hoping, will be better for him. And it's because the pandemic has made us really think about what really matters.
Thanks so much, Teresa. It's great to hear from both you and Dr. Kim. I think you echoing what we saw from the word cloud with the audience, this connection with people and optimism, as well as the vaccine. Our third judge is Mohamed Amersi. Mohamed Amersi is a renowned global communications entrepreneur, philanthropist, and thought leader. A lawyer by training, Mohamed has used his position to contribute positively to society, supporting many charitable initiatives and social ventures. The Amersi Foundation, established in 2012, supports a vast range of global issues and is a recipient of the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Award for its philanthropic work. Most importantly, he is an alum of Oxford Business School. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mohammed. What's giving you optimism?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. And let me start by saying that I reflected on a word which I call a word full of irony. And by that I mean is the usual things that no one is safe until we are all safe. There is a culprit and it's all around, but it cannot be seen. Be positive, but test negative, okay? Don't touch, but do keep in touch. Come together by staying apart. The air is so pure, yet we are required to wear masks. People have clean hands, but there is a ban on shaking hands. So when I reflect on all of this, I think that the optimism that I see is really into three parts. First is that I think that we as human beings have recognized what it means to be human and how important it is to promote humanity and the oneness of humanity here. Secondly, I think that the pandemic has had one big positive, which is it has allowed to look at what we need to disrupt and how we can build a better world going forward. And if this had not happened, then so many practices would have continued to stay the way that they were, and we as society would have benefited. And my third optimism is that we were so unprepared when the pandemic hit us. And hopefully now we will have been able to learn lessons from this. So next time around when there is, and hopefully there will not be very soon, but if and when there is, we will be far better prepared on how to tackle it. And one example of this is, of course, vaccines, where we were able to develop them in absolutely record time with so far extremely good results. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. And those are our 3, not 4 judges. And Peter, over to you to kick us off.
Wonderful. Thanks again to all our judges. You have a difficult task ahead of you today. And with that, let's begin the pitch competition. Just a reminder to all of you tuning in from all over the world. Once again, thank you for being a part of this. Pay attention. We're going to be calling on you as judges to vote for the audience award at the end of the pitch competition. You'll also have a chance to send in questions for Jim as part of our keynote conversation a little bit later as well. Just before we start, note that the 4 groups are presenting in random order. And first up, we have Team Drastic Plastic from the Climate Reset track. They've focused on reducing carbon emissions from plastic food packaging. Please give them a warm welcome.
We use plastic all the time, for our groceries, for our takeaway food, for our drinks. We see plastic washed up on beaches and in landfill next to impoverished communities. But something we don't see, something less visible that affects us all, is the significant amount of carbon emissions that come with that plastic. From extracting raw materials, from manufacturing, from transport, and from that plastic decomposing over many years. This is a major problem because plastic production is set to triple by 2050. Amounting to 15% of the maximum carbon budget required to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. Food packaging alone, which accounts for 40% of plastic production, has seen a resurgence since COVID-19, increasing by 4 times in some countries since 2020. While COVID has accelerated this problem, plastic production has been growing for years. Oil and gas majors have invested $500 billion in production plants over the last decade, with significant economies of scale to be realised. The result is that plastic is deeply ingrained in global food supply chains, putting efforts to combat climate change and human lives at risk.
Our research and interview shows that the status quo is maintained by a variety of factors. As mentioned previously, there are economies of scale at play for many years, making virgin plastic cheap to produce. On a social level, the single-use attitude toward plastic food packaging is ingrained in our culture. On the political level, our research reveals that power currently lies with those the most invested in plastic. Oil and gas companies and other major players are using their resources to maintain the status quo. Looking at the current system map here, the one thing I want to leave you with is that one-way linear relationship up from the oil and gas company down to the consumer and waste management. Only a very small part is put back in the system through the recycler. In fact, only 9% of the plastic ever produced has been recycled so far. Our conclusion from the system analysis is that the problem is deeply complex. We also believe that, at least for now, plastic is here to stay.
Accepting that plastic is here to stay for now, we looked at the plastic life cycle to better understand where the problem of carbon emission lies. What we can see here is that there is significant unknown emissions leakage as plastic decomposes in landfill and oceans. And the majority of known emissions come from upstream extraction and manufacturing of virgin plastic. Next, we looked into past interventions and found 4 main takeaways why they have failed to drive systems change. 1, they have been siloed rather than integrated. 2, they have addressed symptoms rather than causes. 3, they have failed to change mindsets and behaviors. And 4, they have not been scaled sufficiently. So based on our systems analysis, we designed an intervention strategy to increase circularity and transparency. The underlying logic of our intervention strategy is that the increase in recovered plastic leads to a 1-on-1 reduction in virgin plastic production and buys time for scalable plastic alternatives to be developed. So the guiding star is plastic demand is fully covered by recovered plastic and plastic alternatives, and virgin plastic goes to 0. The complementary threefold intervention strategy consists of 3 distinct interventions each addressing the main bottlenecks to increase system circularity. A centralized data platform, smart design and labels, and circular infrastructure.
As mentioned, one of the key contributors to the problem was lack of supply chain transparency. It has allowed stakeholders to maintain the status quo and carbon emission data to be lost with nobody to hold accountable. So we designed a central database where data gets inputted from all the stakeholders, and analytics output can be used to support research, better regulation, and inform consumers. If we want to win the battle against plastic, democratizing data is absolutely necessary. Second, we realize current packaging needs a massive reform in order to increase plastic recovery and phase out virgin production. We suggest packaging that is standardized, modular, and dematerialized. These sound like scary big words, but what they basically mean is packaging that is reusable indefinitely and not thrown out after one use. The smart packaging will also have smart labels to track and recover them. Additionally, consumers will have access to this app. The app tells them everything they need to know about the packaging and the end-of-life process. To encourage consumers to partake, the app works with food companies and grocery stores to offer rewards and coupons. Lastly, circular infrastructure provides the underlying foundation for the interventions. Designed by using the principles of circular economy, it is decentralized, it can be deployed at a smaller scale, and is replicable across many cities and countries. Deploying at a smaller scale was really important for us because that means it doesn't need massive capital upfront. And it removes the waste component, ensuring that every single piece of existing plastic will stay in the system.
This space is experiencing change at an unprecedented rate, and areas that were previously thought of as hindrances to change are rapidly becoming more receptive to it. Ever-increasing consumer awareness, combined with the growing availability of ESG funding, is contributing to a shift in public sentiment. This sentiment will flow through to brands who may have to bear upfront costs, but will ultimately benefit as reusability decreases long-term costs and consumers continue to prioritize brands that make these changes. With this in mind, I present the new status quo, incorporating our proposed interventions, which will drive change among not just consumers or brands or fossil fuel companies, but everyone who has a stake in this issue. In this new system, plastic will remain part of the equation, but the need for virgin plastic is removed. The power balance will be realigned in a more equitable way, and the formerly linear system will be replaced with a circular one. With the world emerging from COVID-19, COP26 on the horizon, and aggressive emissions reductions targets just announced last week by the US and others, this system is ripe for disruption, and the time for that disruption is now.
Thank you, Team Drastic Plastic. I hope you can hear me. Well done. We can all virtual applaud. We're now going to bring them on screen live along with our three judges and move into the 5-minute Q&A period. I'll just note for the presenters that our time is short, so please do keep your answers concise. Judges, take it away.
I'll jump in. So, one of the things that I think we've seen during COVID, this is a disaster that has affected literally every human on Earth, and we have not been able to organize for global action. What you're calling for, a central database, for example, a new packaging system in which grocery stores will offer rewards. How are you going to get the global action to happen? Which organizations would do it? Who would put up the money? Because if we can't do it in the face of the worst pandemic in 100 years, what's the likelihood of being able to do this when there are very, very strong vested interests like the petroleum industry?
Yeah, so I can take the question. So what we're suggesting is a combination of regulatory, industrial, and consumer forces getting together as one to create a compelling case for all the stakeholders of the plastic value chain to partake in this. And the good news is the system is already going that way. Like if you look at the recent developments in this area, like there are regulations coming up, like mandatory carbon reporting regulation in the UK as a part of the Our Waste, Our Resources Strategy for England program. And then there's one coming up in the US called Break Free from Plastic Act. And these combine with some of the industry standard developments like IFRS and SASB, combined with public and consumer pressure. We are confident that we can create a compelling case for these stakeholders to partake in this system.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of quick questions, if I may. Is this problem, in your view, localized? Is it globalized? So that if, for example, you can get the United Kingdom to try to look at this, but most of Europe, perhaps, if it's not looking at it, then does it really solve, at the end of the day, the problem of global greenhouse gas emission targets? So that's one issue. Secondly, what is it that is so proprietary about your knowledge and your know-how? Is it just more than just a database, but that's replicable? So what's really the edge here that you have? And thirdly, it's like things like modern day slavery, number of other challenges that corporations face. Unless you have an enforcement process that then starts to penalize people who have breached their obligations, it's not really going to have much teeth. So how do you look at that?
Thank you. I'm happy to answer the first question around whether this is a global or local problem, and I'll pass to my teammates. Absolutely, this is a global challenge, and climate change affects everyone, and in particular, it affects developing countries. In terms of solution, we think it's helpful to start local and to trial solutions that are easily replicable in other contexts. So the UK and Europe, for example, are fertile grounds for trying these solutions. As Manisha said before, there's already legislation in the UK, for example, around carbon reporting. In Europe, there's also fairly strong recycling schemes, or at least compared to other countries. So yes, we think it's a global problem, but in terms of the solution, we start local and then scale out.
So I'm happy to take the second question about what's new and proprietary here. So there is, in a sense, there's nothing particularly proprietary about this, and we don't necessarily want it to be. Our goal is to address this problem, and what we've done here is identified in the system that the solutions that have been enacted so far have been enacted in a siloed way and kind of in an isolated manner. And so I guess kind of what we're bringing to the table here as value is a way to coordinate all of these solutions at once and kind of enact them in a way that they can feed off of each other and actually realize real change.
I can briefly the third question. You mentioned enforcement. That's a very good point. The way we approach this actually is to think about instead incentivization. So that's why we thought about different schemes where we can involve, for example, the supermarket as a partner to incentivize the people to bring back the recycling and have some sort of coupon they can use or money back. So that's the way we could incentivize people. But I think there's a great point here to get a government and policies involved and get those people to help the community to get engaged with this, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll have to leave it there. Team Drastic Plastic, well done. Thank you very much. And I will now turn it over to Zainab to introduce the second group.
So our second team is Elevate Raya. Elevate Raya is from our social reset track, and they are exploring gender inequality in Nigeria's agricultural sector. So let's see what they put together.
Imagine if at 26, you had to support 7 young children with $1 wages and no immediate hope for a better situation. This is the story of Raya, a Muslim female farmer living in the Zamfara state in northern Nigeria. She is the product of an unending cycle of gender disparity in agriculture that leaves her with little independence and almost no community support or access to resources. Her story is all too common in Nigeria and around the world.
The place of gender disparity is quite unique in the Nigerian agricultural context. For a 150 million farming population, it is bothersome that agricultural value per capita is less than 1%. A country whose country is set to double to 400 million by 2040, but is yet unable to produce enough that it eats. A situation now worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic effect on global exploitation. Studies from the World Bank have linked the root cause of these problems to gender disparity in agriculture. In Nigeria, it is a wicked problem plaguing 90 million female farmers. Solving this problem in Nigeria alone means global reduction in unemployment by 29%, extreme poverty by 12%, and hunger by 4%. This problem is not new. The landscape is teeming with solutions attempting to address it, yet it persists. Why? Using a causal look to understand the underlying patterns that have kept female farmers like Raya stuck, we found 3 key factors: financial burden, strong customary law, and social norms. For example, due to social norms, women would likely plant food crops like maize than cash crops like millet, thus limited to shortfalls of food crop production due to low government support and poor mechanization, resulting in multiple poverty cycles, hunger, illiteracy, and population increase. Note that population increase could mean higher rates of insecurity, but it definitely means an increase in federal resource allocation and political power for the northwestern states. The state government, in return, would invest in an obviously beneficial cash crop production already dominated by the male farmers due to the immediate export benefits, providing mechanization and creating wealth cycles for the men. However, this one-sided empowerment cycle costs the nation not just $10 billion annually in foregone export opportunities, but rising shortfalls in food crop production, hunger, unemployment, and poverty. Having traced these patterns, we drew a systems map for the female smallholder farmer, dividing the agricultural footprint across 6 sections. These are customs and tradition, family and friends, education, NGOs and local businesses, technology and banking, and governmental policies and intervention. From these, we highlighted the potential barriers to a successful intervention in orange and emphasized the leverage points we hope to explore in green. On a closer look, we narrowed our levers to 3 key points: community buy-in, including the husband, the female peer group, and the male farmer support, equipment and financing via local partnerships, and informal education to ensure co-creation and sustainability. As we rebuild a new normal, we believe these interventions will make the most impact.
In the past, a myriad of fragmented solutions have failed because they did not account for the following. Customary law is enforced in rural communities and overrides federal law. Community and religious leaders are not involved in the development and rollout of solutions, and the larger community needs to be educated on how they stand to benefit from giving women more resources or opportunities. To better understand Raya's life, we interviewed Nigerian farmers, government officials, and local NGOs. We then designed a social behavioral intervention with the goal of bridging gender divide in Nigeria's agricultural sector. Our solution takes into consideration barriers in our system, such as the importance in upholding customs that propagate the gender gap, biases held by religious and community leaders, and poor mobile phone adoption, while simultaneously pulling levers for change, such as uncovering opportunities to finance equipment, creating support groups, and providing education to the entire community. Our comprehensive solution has 3 pieces that should be implemented concurrently: getting community members buy-in and integrating their feedback, providing community training on gender and the best use of equipment, and offering equipment leasing solutions for female farmers. Our staggered intervention is based on the principles of trust, connection, and sustainability. The rollout of our solution will take place in 3 stages. In the short term, we will build rapport with community and religious leaders before engaging with the farmers. This will ensure that we have the support from key stakeholders that are able to mobilize their communities. Due to high levels of illiteracy in these rural communities, We will use storybooks, including door stickers and wallpaper, to educate community members on both efficient agricultural practices and gender. In the midterm, we will work with the Equipment Leasing Association of Nigeria to identify leasing companies that are willing to give favorable rates to women who are seeking agricultural equipment. Once we have identified early adopters for this equipment leasing program, we will train them as advocates to further reach more female farmers. In the long term, we will continue establishing partnerships with innovative fintech and agritech firms and female-centered NGOs that are interested in adding more pieces to the puzzle. To conclude, we explored potential risks and developed mitigation strategies based on successful community health projects led by Nigeria's Center for Disease Control. We expect that those who will be most threatened by our work will be male farmers, religious leaders, and the local or state government. Our key strategy will be to reframe our message as one of cohesiveness, not one in which we are only offering opportunities to women like Raya, but one in which the entire community benefits from enabling women to take a larger role in agricultural practices.
While Raya will still live within the same system, she will see cycles of gender disparity start to weather and crack. She will gain access to resources and functional literacy that will allow her to grow her farming business while being supported by her community. Cycles of poverty might seem unchanged in the short term, but her children and grandchildren will reap benefits from the seeds she's planted. This is not just Raya's story. It's the story of millions of female farmers across Nigeria and around the world. The time to help them rise up is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Team Elevate Raya. Let's hear from our judges. Teresa.
Thanks very much for this presentation. I was particularly curious about, with what you guys are working on, I mean, changing customs, traditions, I mean, these are mental models of how women have seen themselves, but also how communities and everyone around them has seen them. And those are grounded in centuries of tradition. And how do you go about changing that? What are your strategies for effective messaging? Even with that message of solidarity, what does that actually look like? How do you think about when shifting power, how shifting power can be a message of shifting power to women doesn't necessarily mean that others are losing out?
Thank you very much. I can take the question. For our project, what we started out with doing was to understand the Northwestern system and to understand also the female farmers within the system. And what we found was that these women are very, very dependent on opinion leaders within the system. So not only are they very risk averse, they actually follow what they actually go with community validation. So in understanding this particular concept and also speaking with the various farmers on ground within the region, we also spoke with successful intervention leaders within the system too, with the CDC as well, and how they carried out their effective health projects in the region. So what we plan to do, we plan a staggered approach. First, we are going to try to get community validation. Because we believe that if the community gives these women go ahead, they will be able to buy into our project. That's why we started with an entry meeting, community buy-in. And then when it comes to communicating with these women, I remember one of the interviews we carried out, the women spoke Hausa language, that is the native language within the region, and there was no way we could communicate with them. So we had to use one of the local NGOs within the community that interacts with these women one-on-one. And that was how we were able to curate information from them. And that's why we're also proposing storybooks, because they are very visual focused when it comes to understanding the key message you're trying to pass across to them. So we're going to employ storybooks. We're going to also do like some sort of impact evaluation with our project. So at the start of the project, we start with a questionnaire to test the knowledge as it is currently. And then from there, 6 months later, 1 year later, we go back and we retest to be sure that if we need to adjust certain things within our intervention. And also we plan to probably separate the group, maybe a controlled group and the intervention group, in order to properly measure the differences and the different things we might need to implement along the way, just to monitor the progress we are making as our intervention, for our interventions.
Let me jump in for a second here. So first of all, it's just your analysis is very compelling, and of course the issue is very compelling. But you say things like, we're going to get community buy-in. Right? Now, your director, Peter Droback, has worked for many years in trying to do this, and I think he has a good sense of just how difficult it is. And how do you do it, though, on a project basis? How do you do it when you don't speak the language? How do you do it when they know that it's a project? Right? Projects have life cycles. You're talking about massive cultural change. Teresa described, this is generations of culture. And as an anthropologist, I can tell you that projects very rarely change culture. Right? So how are you going to do it when you don't speak the language, when it's a project, when you're going to be leaving, when they know you're going to be leaving, and where the resource is going to come from to, for example, if you're going to have improve the lot of women, you probably have to hire people from the community who speak the language, and you probably have to pay them. I mean, this is not something that people don't have leisure time to do this because they think your project sounds exciting. Sorry to be so pointed, but this is having tried this so many times,
Yes, I could go. So I am from Nigeria, and I've actually lived for a period of time in the northwestern region of the country. And I agree with you that, of course, it is quite difficult to get community buy-in, especially when these people perceive you as someone that is not from their area. So that's why one thing we're going to capitalize, or we hope to capitalize through our project, is we're going to leverage partnerships. Now, we mentioned community buy-in, agreed, but also we're going to take into strong consideration our partnerships. We're not just going to walk into the area like people that are going to change the system. Oh, no. We already have mapped out the existing bodies that are on ground, and then we're also going to work through these bodies, of course, because we believe that these women, they don't necessarily respond to new introductions within the system. They respond with systems of people they're already used to. So that's why one of the key things we're also going to do, just like Opportunity International, if you're familiar with the NGO, they look for early adopters, not just early adopters, but success stories within the system that have somehow been able to do whatever it is that they were planning to do. So we would look for female farmers in that community that have successfully grown their farming business, understand the way they do it as well, then bring them into the process. When it comes to funding, of course, we're not looking to start. So let me just go over.
All right, Susan. We're going to have to leave it there. I know our timing is tight. We want to respect everyone's time. Great questions, really thoughtful responses. Thank you, Team Raya. Well done. Sorry, Mohammed, I'll have to leave it there. We're going to move on to Team 3 at this time. And this is Team Educate Our Girls, specifically Team #EducateOurGirls. So if you'd like, feel free to help them go viral. And tweet that hashtag. Let's see what they have to. Sorry, the team has looked at understanding secondary education for girls in Kenya. Let's see what they have to say.
11 million people is the entire population of Greece or Belgium or Rwanda. And according to a recent World Bank report, it's also the number of girls that may never return to school following the current global pandemic. With a shared passion for education and gender equality, with 2 teammates having worked in education and gender in Kenya, and a 3rd teammate native to the continent, we journeyed to understand the complexities surrounding girls' secondary education in Kenya.
I'd like to introduce you to Grace, one of our interviewees and an incredible teacher at a rural public secondary school in Western Kenya. Last year, 261 girls enrolled at Grace's school. Sadly, as girls progressed through their 4 years of secondary education, we learned of various factors that led them to leave school without returning. By the end of the final year of school, only 181 girls remained out of the initial 261, evidence of a big completion problem. In Kenya, students take a national KCSE exit exam to determine their eligibility for university. Of the 181 girls that sat this exam, only 25 achieved C+ or above, which was the cutoff mark for higher education eligibility, evidence of a quality problem. And of those who were eligible, only 9 girls actually went on to university. Now, taking a step back from Grace's school, on a national level, the dropout rate is 18% for girls, but only 6% for boys, evidence of a systemic completion problem. Even more worrying is that COVID has exacerbated this. Grace observed 5 times more girls not returning to school following the 9-month COVID closure than would normally drop out during holiday breaks. So for our systems reset challenge, we focused on educating our girls by improving the quality and completion of public secondary education for girls in Kenya.
To understand the layers of complexities, we spoke to several stakeholders, including former Kenyan students, members of their community, and experts involved in emerging markets education policy. In order to get feedback from a broader audience, we conducted a survey with dozens of former students in Kenya that confirmed our findings about the issues in the system. 61% of respondents said they were dissatisfied with their high school education. We structured the feedback from our interviews and survey using the iceberg analysis. First, we looked at the tip of the iceberg, the surface level problems or events. The most apparent causes of the quality problem are low classroom engagement, low quality instruction, and a lack of resources. The completion problem is explained by poverty at home, lack of school fees, pregnancy, and early marriage. In the deeper layers of the iceberg, we see the root causes that lead to these surface level issues. For example, at the very bottom of the iceberg are detrimental mental models, such as deprioritization of education for girls and doubt in whether the system leads to success.
We aggregated our analysis in our systems maps, aka the wicked fly. 3 key leverage points stood out for us based on our 3 most critical issues. Firstly, lack of funds for school fees, since recent Acumen research suggested that affordability of schooling is the #1 pain point for Kenyan parents. Secondly, low teacher preparedness and motivation, since researchers note that teachers play the most important role in influencing learning outcomes. And thirdly, existing mindsets, as these address issues at the level of mental models and hence have the potential to affect the entire system. So how can we address this? Based on our analysis, as a first step, we developed a list of 10 potential unprioritized solutions to form the solution landscape. We then prioritized them based on impact or levers of change and implementation complexity. Implementation complexity relates to effort and readiness of the existing environment. For example, we would love to roll out tablets to all students, but without reliable electricity and internet infrastructure, the system is just not ready for this yet. As shown in the top left, the 3 most impactful and feasible solutions are a community finance business model, a teaching effectiveness program, and awareness and education campaigns. Each addresses one of the key leverage points in the system.
To educate our girls, we propose implementing a community finance business model involving chamas, informal community investing and savings groups in Kenya, mostly composed of women. We believe that the power of chamas has the most potential for keeping girls in school. Leveraging local communities enables a sustainable and scalable solution towards financing, as opposed to sponsorship or donor funding. Our teaching effectiveness program addresses the quality problem and comprises 3 core components: the design of standardized and detailed lesson plans that free up teacher capacity, training and rollout of these lesson plans, and feedback and continuous improvement for teachers. Awareness and education programs aim to address mental models in students, parents, and the broader community, through 3 pillars: a student mentorship program that aims to educate participating girls about different career and education opportunities, a parent engagement program that educates and regularly informs parents about students' performance, and a public awareness campaign that challenges girls' traditional role in society.
We believe that the public school system cannot be fixed without the government's participation. Short term, we prioritize local bottom-up implementation of the initiatives under an umbrella of a newly created nonprofit organization. And long term, systematizing the solution by embedding it in the public system is indispensable to achieving scale. Because we want to live in a world where women represent their fair share in government, public life, and boardrooms. A world where Grace doesn't say goodbye to every third girl in her class before graduation, and all her girls shine at the KCSE exam. We believe in educating our girls. How about you?
Thank you very much, Team Educate Our Girls. Terrific presentation. We are going to open it up to the judges for Q&A. Who would like to kick things off?
I'm curious about the different solutions that you presented, and specifically how you think about intersectionality. It strikes me that some things like teacher effectiveness might impact both boys and girls together, versus some of the other ones may be more targeted. And how you think intersectionality plays into these pillars and how they may be perceived. And I guess, and related to that, I'd also say how you think about these pillars interacting with each other. Do you think of them as a bundle, or do you think of them as kind of separate programs?
So I'm happy to take the first question, Teresa. Thank you for your question. So firstly, I think we note that some of these initiatives or these solutions may impact both boys and girls. And instead of seeing it as a drawback, we see it as if they impact boys as this as an added benefit. Although our solutions predominantly focus on girls. So for example, the Chalmers, we would focus the Chalmers spending, because there's a limited amount of resources, on girls. For teaching effectiveness, we'd start off with girls' schools. And for the education and awareness campaigns, it would be directed towards women.
Oh, okay, thank you. That's helpful. I think where my initial thinking was some research I'd read with a program that does focus on girls' education, but had an easier time rolling it out because it was a teacher effectiveness program, and since it does serve boys and girls, it's just an easier sell in some ways. So I was kind of, I think I was aligned with where you're headed.
And I think, sorry, you had a question around how these relate. I'm happy to take that. So the third pillar, which is general awareness and education, so kind of aiming to change mindsets. We see those shifting mindsets as almost like a prerequisite for the other two initiatives. So we see that, if we change students' mindsets, parents' mindsets, if parents become more supportive, then that addresses the completion problem directly.
Can I ask, do we have time, Peter?
Of course, Mohammed.
So a couple of points. Firstly, I'm a big believer that if you educate a boy, you educate one person. If you educate a girl, you educate a family. The second point I would make is that I'm an investor in Bridge Academy in Kenya, which, as you know, is the private education platform for primary children. And we were looking at doing something for secondary children. But my fundamental question on this is that it really depends on what is expected of the girl and of the young woman when they are in secondary and university education. By and large, they are not expected to be the breadwinners. And if they're not expected to be the breadwinners going forward, then there is less incentive, both in government as well as in societies, to push them to completing their higher education and then going on to universities degrees, because they are not expected to go out and work and earn a living. So until that is changed, that mindset is shifted, you will find that there will always be a positive bias towards boys and men as opposed to girls. And then there is also a big problem between private and public education. And I wonder whether one way to look at this is to engage in the private space, and then that will push the government and the public space to catch up with the private space if in fact the results and the dropout rates in the private space are fewer. And the final point is that this is not going to work as long as Kenya cannot provide enough universities and colleges of higher education into which boys or girls after completing secondary education can go into.
Thank you, Mohammed, for those comments. Yeah, I think those are all extremely valid points and definitely things that we heard about through a lot of our interviewees. I think this is why it was so important to us to propose a solution that was kind of threefold, that really addressed the mindsets, so that all of the other kind of pieces that come into play afterwards can help shift that focus to the importance of girls' education. And for us, a lot of the root of this project was the idea that we really wanted to start from kind of the beginning point and educating girls very early on, so that we can continue to see girls grow and prosper and make it to university, and then continue to flourish in society. So yeah, I think the three-part solution was proposed because of a lot of those elements.
Thank you. We're short on time, but Jim, I know you have a ton of experience in this area, and I wonder if you could just share maybe a comment or suggestion in the short time we have.
Just a quick question. Why an NGO? I mean, it's always, the solution seems to be, we need a, there used to be old Mickey Rooney movies that they would say, let's put on a show, right? And I've seen it happen so many times. Whereas the group that Mohammed is investing in is getting better outcomes at about the same cost, which is driving people to vote with their feet. And there have been criticisms of Bridge. I'm a fan. I think it's changed the game because it's been able to just deliver better education. So why an NGO? And why always an NGO?
I can take this. So
we started an NGO. So
keep it brief, okay? Thanks.
Yeah, trying to keep it brief. So yes, we suggest to start an NGO, but we see the role of this NGO as more of an organization that coordinates kind of the system and partners with already existing organizations. So just to mention one example is the Chama example. So we don't see the NGO as kind of a lender. So it's not the NGO that's actually doing the work. It's the NGO that maybe designs the solution, but then partners with existing organizations that already work with Chamas, and kind of with their help scale the solution.
So just one quick thing. Everyone loves coordination and everyone equally hates being coordinated.
That is hard-won wisdom right there, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. Team, Zainab, over to you.
Yeah, so thank you, Team Educate, #EducateOurGirls. So we are at the final team now. So I would like to welcome Team WOW, working on wellness from the Health Reset track. Team WOW looked at workplace isolation in the setting of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's look at their research.
We're working on wellness, and we're here today to talk to you about our project focused on addressing isolation to improve workplace wellness in Toronto, Canada. I'd like you to take a brief moment to reflect on a time in the last week or month when You just ached to sit next to a colleague and get some work done together in person. This sort of discrepancy that many of us are feeling between our desired and experienced social interaction is really what loneliness and isolation is all about. This sort of feeling of disconnectedness and aloneness, sort of defined by this discrepancy. And this is a serious issue. Loneliness is actually associated with increases in risk of coronary heart disease and higher chances of stroke, and is statistically as damaging for our health as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. The relationship between isolation, increased work, and hyperconnectivity is becoming extra salient in the COVID era when we're hearing about increases in sort of work-related stress overall. And this really leads us to the question of why we should address isolation. First of all, we all experience isolation and loneliness, and it affects all of our health. It's also being increased by remote work and sort of the COVID-19 pandemic in this current moment. And finally, these are issues that are worth addressing in their own right. Not only do they cause downstream issues, but nobody likes to feel lonely and isolated, and that is something that we ought to proactively address.
So why did we choose to focus on Toronto, Canada, to explore the systemic nature and impact of isolation on work-related mental health wellness? First, mental wellness is a salient issue in Toronto. Second, Toronto can be seen as a prototypic urban case study, having a population of 5 million, a huge demographic diversity, and a multifaceted industry landscape. So, isolation has always been known as an issue affecting certain population groups. Why is now the time to make it a priority and treat it as a topic in its own right? Informed by a representative survey we conducted on isolation in the working population and an extensive literature review, we derived that isolation in a pre-COVID world focused on certain population groups, such as the elderly, but without doubt, today, somehow affects almost everyone. Around 80% of our survey respondents reported increased isolation through COVID-19, and recent studies list isolation as a key driver for adverse mental health. This led us to our guiding star. In a future where remote work and the use of technology will further increase, isolation shall be uncommon and understood as a collective issue to be proactively addressed.
Through some extensive secondary research and a set of key informant interviews, we mapped the set of interactions that hold in place the notion that isolation should only be addressed if it leads to some sort of downstream effect, like diagnosed mental illness. We observed 3 key patterns that hold these dynamics in place, and we're calling those patterns 1, reactive medical care, 2, barriers to care, in particular proactive care, and 3, social stigma as a hurdle.
First, reactive medical care. In Canada, there's universal health care. We found that individuals don't tend to seek out proactive care for well-being related support, but rather wait until a real issue arises. This pattern reinforces the idea that medical care is only justified when it's addressing an acute issue and not preventing them from before happening. This pattern opens up an opportunity. Emphasize using the puzzle piece icon to explore reimbursement schemes and the ways individuals access medical care. The second pattern is what we're calling barriers to care. In this case, we're not talking about formal medical care, but rather about care delivered by counselors, therapists, and similar products, which may be better resources for providing and mitigating isolation and loneliness. While we found many interesting sub-issues here, one thing was that registered psychotherapists and counselors are taxed 13% sales tax, while other type of care services are not. And then finally, there is a social stigma of isolation and loneliness, which is complex and not easily summarized. It can, however, be understood to be perpetuated through the ways organization and media make sense of and communicate these issues in relation to other stigmatized phenomenons, like drug use and mental illness. This reveals the importance of addressing societal perception in efforts to revamp the system. And finally, what we see here is a summary of these 3 patterns, including emphasis on the potential levers for change, identified by the puzzle pieces, which will allow us to remap the system to rethink isolation as an issue to be addressed proactively.
The current solutions landscape can be understood through a lens that considers 4 key players: government, private industry, non-governmental organizations, and employees. This landscape is characterized by solutions which are A, highly fragmented, and B, heavily weighted towards reactive interventions. Our analysis highlighted the opportunity to fill the gap with a proactive and coordinated intervention approach. We thus propose a multi-pronged strategy that intervenes across 3 domains: government, the non-government sector, and the private sector. First, our government-focused intervention entails lobbying for key policy changes in order to transform high-level structures. The first policy would add isolation-related principles into the current national standard for psychological health and safety in the workplace, or the standard, implemented by the Mental Health Commission of Canada, or the MHCC. We would also push for policy cutting the sales tax on clinical mental wellness services, thus reducing a key barrier to proactive care. Our second intervention involves the establishment of a nonprofit that leverages MHCC's existing initiatives to evaluate and rank major employers' performance on isolation and connectivity-related metrics. This solution will incentivize employers to get on board with tackling isolation and also reshape the social perception of it. Our third intervention helps employers to produce change within their organizations via a private venture which offers an app designed to track high-level isolation-related metrics and provide individual recommendations for proactive mitigation strategies. These metrics will be informed by the standard, thus interweaving a common thread through each element of our solution. We also considered feasibility and impact in designing our solution. The outcome of this analysis is reflected in the design of our rollout plan. For example, our non-governmental intervention is highly feasible in the short term as it leverages already existing infrastructure and directly supports the mission originally mandated by the government in 2007. In contrast, our government intervention is subject to a longer implementation time horizon. Changing the tax policy would have significant financial repercussions, and thus would require a thorough budget analysis to identify how to compensate for the revenue lost as a result of cutting taxes.
In conclusion, our three-pronged intervention approach will lead to a remapping of the system that ensures that isolation is something that is not only addressed reactively, accomplishing our vision of achieving a future in which, despite increased remote work, isolation is uncommon and understood as a collective issue to be addressed proactively.
Thank you, team WOW working on wellness. Let's hear from our judges. Dr. Kim, would you like to start off?
So, I was very struck by the focus of it, and that I think it's a good object lesson in that there are things that have a huge impact on morbidity that I think are open to solutions like this. And so a question for you guys is, so who are going to be the big actors once you start the NGO? Canada has a universal healthcare system. Who are going to be the actors that you need to respond to really change the level of isolation in Toronto? And what's your sense of how what you're doing is going to have an impact on those critical actors?
Thank you so much for that question. I think the question of impact and how to roll this out and who we would need to partner with is incredibly important. When we think about who would have to be our first points of contact to have the kind of impact that we would like, I think of, for example, the Ontario Teachers Union, right? So it's the one of the largest unions in the world. And so these sorts of organized bodies of employees are probably a major sort of collaborator required for, I guess, this particular venture or not-for-profit venture. But I don't think necessarily that it would have to be a not-for-profit venture. It could also just be some sort of partnership or coalition or something like that that doesn't have necessarily funding, but would integrate those sorts of partnerships.
So that was my question was leading in that direction. The kind of morbidity that comes from isolation and loneliness has a direct impact probably on employers, right? And so one of the things you could look at is health insurance. A good friend of mine started a company that has been wildly effective in dealing with opioid addiction, and eventually what happened was that company became successful because the insurers could see that his program was going to save them tons of money and lower their overall morbidity. And so I think that's a really good tag for you. I mean, because in a way, because universal healthcare is universal healthcare, and who knows how hard they're charging to reduce costs and make outcomes better. But that's one thing in terms of the health element of this that could make this move. And it makes it in many ways much easier than the brilliant projects that are focused on Nigeria and Kenya, which for which there's not an immediate interest. And if you do your thing effectively, it will lower our costs. Therefore, we're interested. And because you have that, you should build that into your model. What about, insurers? What about health systems that would, I think, see a benefit if you did well with your work?
Just to respond very briefly, where we envision insurers fitting into our proposed intervention would be with our for-profit ventures. So for the for-profits that are supporting employers to improve isolation, because employers are usually the ones to pay for these sort of secondary insurance benefits for employees. So absolutely, that is something we've thought about. Thank you.
I have a quick question, if I may. Do we have time, or if not, it's fine?
We could do one more question.
We do, yes.
So I just would like, thank you very much. Great presentation. Isolation, loneliness are very big, especially after COVID-19 and this whole drive towards automation and robotics and all that. But I would like you to take a step back. So it was, I think, the Dutch philosopher Erasmus who said in 1500 that prevention is better than cure. Why would you not look at what is it in the first place that prevents isolation and loneliness from happening? So why not look at social cohesion programs and community building programs that would then avoid the need to impact the health system and all these extra costs? Have you looked at the prevention part of this?
So I love this question, and this is actually the heart of the essence of sort of where we were trying to go with this, because when we started, we were interested in hyperconnectivity and increased remote work as it relates to mental health, and isolation is already sort of the one step back. We're trying to get closer to prevention, but absolutely, I think there's a bit more work to do in terms of thinking about, I mean, you mentioned social cohesion. We're also interested in diversity as it relates to isolation. So there are some portions of the population that might disproportionately experience isolation in the workplace. And those are things that in a 7-minute talk, we can't really elaborate on, but absolutely, it's a great comment. Thank you so much. And maybe anyone else wants to add in thoughts.
Okay, I think we will leave it there. So thank you to Team WOW working on wellness, and thank you to the judges. So we really had a diverse and impressive set of presentations. So I want to thank all of the finalists, and also thank you to the judges for your probing questions and your reflective thoughts on each of those projects. So the next part of what we'll move into, the judges will now retire to deliberate over each of the presentations. And during this time, we want to hear from you, your thoughts on the team presentations. And this is where you can have your say and feed into the Audience Choice Award. So we will go back to menti.com. And there, once you get there, you can enter the code 57739565 if you haven't already done so, and enter your vote for one of the 4 teams. So is it going to be Team 1, Drastic Plastic, Team 2, Elevate Raya, Team 3, #Educate Our Girls, or Team 4, WOW, Working on Wellness? So enter your votes now. The opportunity to vote will be open for the next 5 minutes, and then we will bring you the results after our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll leave that voting open for a few more minutes. Make sure you just get the code so that you can at least log on as we move on. And in the meantime, it's my pleasure at this time to introduce our Dean, Professor Peter Tufano. Peter is the Peter Moores Dean, lots of Peters, Peter Moores Dean and Professor of Finance at Side Business School and a fellow at Balliol College. I won't recount his whole biography here, but I just do want to highlight that that Dean Tufano was the original architect of the GOTO program, an effort that was recognized a couple of years ago with a Faculty Pioneer Award from the Aspen Institute for Business and Society. He's continued to teach on GOTO every year, despite how busy he is as a tutor. And it's fair to say that I think this program is really special to him as it is to me. And so I've asked Peter to share some of his thoughts on the significance of GOTO at the current moment and how it fits into his vision for the school and for business education. Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. start with a big congratulations to all the students, not just the 4 teams that presented today, but the 60 plus teams that have been working on their GOTO projects over the last term. It's just amazing work, and I'm so proud of what we've seen today, which is, I think we had the tip of the iceberg, a graphic in one of the slides, just the tip of the iceberg of a lot of great work. And you asked me to reflect a bit on GOTO. I've been here for 10 years, roughly 10 years ago now, maybe a few months from now, I first arrived. And I remember, in order to understand the school better, I decided that I would grade some of the work that we do at the school. And I remember grading a number of projects that students were working on, and they were perfectly fine projects that would make for good and interesting businesses. And I can still remember one on gluten-free beer. I sat in this very office where I am now, and I was grading this thing on gluten-free beer, and it was technically very well done. But I guess I went home that night and said to my wife, it's great that the students are well trained. It's great that they can figure out how to kind of move ideas forward. But maybe we could raise our gaze a little bit and think about projects that are slightly bigger than gluten-free beer. And at the same time, I was thinking about how it is that we would orient the school around a set of world challenges and about systems. At the time that we did this in 2011, it felt pretty lonely. Most business schools were not focused on systems. Individuals, teams, and organizations were more than enough. Thank you very much. While we've moved a great deal in terms of stakeholders versus shareholders, the idea that we would focus on kind of global challenges and seemed a bit odd and out of place. And I can still remember speaking at a number of deans conferences over the first years that we created GOTO, where I think deans would scratch their heads and say, that's interesting, but we don't have any room for that. Now, 10 years later, sadly, we've experienced a pandemic, as well as we're in the middle of a climate emergency. With all that, it's patently obvious to anyone that the world is deeply interconnected. Sure, we knew that. That the problems that we're going to have to solve will require bridges between business, government, civil society. They're going to require a different kind of training, not an either or training, but the both and training. And that's what GOTO is all about. Can we orient the school around the big challenges of the world? Can we get students to step above the idea of individuals, teams, and organizations? But also, can we make sure that we create something where we're embedded in the university, where we're working with our partners from across the university? If we had a slide with all the tutors from GOTO and they had their affiliations, what we'd see is that we are blessed because we have people from all across the university assisting us. And so just kind of a little mental experiment. Suppose that you Zoom bombed into this session. You didn't know what you were watching, and suddenly you just found yourself sitting through those last 4 presentations. What might you guess was going on? Well, the first thing I think that you'd note is the kind of the geographic and also gender diversity of our students. You'd say, that's interesting. That doesn't look like, I don't know what that looks like. It certainly doesn't look like a US business school. I don't know what that looks like. They're young people, but they're from all over the world. Secondly, you'd see that they're extraordinarily well trained. So you might say, well, maybe they're part of an academic institution. But then third, you'd say, wait a minute. This one's working on a public health problem. This one's working on a plastics and environmental problem. This one's working on empowerment issues. And wait a minute, is this a public health set of students? Is this coming from an education school? Is this whatever? I don't understand. And yes, while some of them, and thanks to Dr. Kim for asking the question about why nonprofits. Yes, some of these were focused on nonprofits. Some of them are focused on for-profits. Some of them focused on governments. And I think if you were just a Zoom bomb, you'd scratch your head and say, "What is this?" And the thing I'm most proud of is that this is Saïd Business School. This is a tremendous set of students focused on some of the biggest problems in the world, who are seeing boundaries being undrawn, not only between various disciplines, but also geographies and more. And yes, their first jobs and their second jobs may not be the things that you've just seen, but the idea that we are but we're helping a generation of young people to think through a set of problems that are way above their pay grade and my pay grade and everybody's pay grade, but therefore all of our problems, makes me extraordinarily proud. So my reflections on GOTO 10 years or almost 10 years on is I couldn't be prouder of the work that the students are doing. I'm extraordinarily grateful to the tutors, especially you see Peter and Zainab today, as representatives, but there's a whole team of people as well as the staff. I can't be grateful enough for the judges who've come out today. But mostly I'm curious to see how it is that the audience votes, I didn't have a chance to get my Menti because I was getting set for this. But I'm curious to see how the audience votes and then the judges vote. And I hope that you, like I, have enjoyed this and felt inspired, challenged, a little bit chastened by it all, and intrigued. Thank you, Peter. Thank you all.
Peter, thanks so much. Sorry, just unmuting myself for those remarks and really for all you've done. GOTO was a big part of what signaled to me that this business school was different. As a social justice doctor, there aren't that many business schools I'd feel at home in. This is one reason for it. You're a big reason for it. I think we hear the same thing from our students. So we appreciate those reflections, and this is a big part of the legacy that you'll be leaving with us from your time as dean. I know we're not ready to talk about that yet, but I do reflect on all the things that that you and we have accomplished together. So thank you. We're going to close the audience vote now, unfortunately. So sorry, Peter, you won't get a vote. So I hope everybody else did get a chance to vote. But I want to move on now to our keynote conversation. Before we come back to the winners. And of course, you've already met our speaker, Dr. Yong Kim, and we've been fortunate to have some really extraordinary GOTO Summit speakers over the years, including Al Gore last year, who spoke with us on climate action. But given the breadth and the urgency of this really big systems reset theme, finding the right kind of speaker was kind of a special challenge, right? Who is it that could speak credibly to global public health issues, shifting economic systems, the climate crisis, issues around poverty, equity, and social justice, who might be able to understand how systems work from the top down, but also from the bottom up. There just aren't that many people who can do all that, and Jim is one of those rare people. You heard his bio already, and you've heard a lot of what he has to say, so this won't come as a surprise. I'll just add that that he's been a mentor and co-conspirator and friend of mine for a number of years in our work at Harvard and Partners in Health, and I'm just so grateful to him for being here today. We're going to have a conversation, and we will try in the time that we have to bring in some questions from you. I think there might be another slide coming up. Apologies for that. Yet another Mentimeter for which you can submit questions, and I will try to get a few questions in. But let's kick it off. Jim, welcome again.
Thank you, Peter. That was really, just a great set of that was a great set of presentations. I thought that was, the most important thing, and this is a great tribute to you and Dean Tufano. The students were very well taught. The analysis was, I thought, as good as anything I've seen, at the World Bank or elsewhere. And of course, these are not easily solvable problems. If they were, we would have made more progress on them over time. So it's a great tribute to the Said Business School and to you and Dean Tufano.
Thanks, Jim, for those comments. I want to start off by talking a little bit about the pandemic that's triggered so much. You and I both have a public health background, and so in some ways, when this was all starting, we weren't too surprised because we both knew it was a matter of when, not if. But what a ride it's been. What surprised you most about the world's response to COVID-19?
Peter, on the one hand, I feel like, gosh, I shouldn't have been surprised because we saw the same thing happen with HIV. I mean, these are the things that you and I have worked on together. The response to HIV, response to Ebola, response to MDR-TB. The whole story of Partners in Health is that we had to fight against what we call public health nihilism, the sense that it can't be done. And the other thing is, when we talked about treating HIV in the early 2000s, and your students won't even remember it, but here we were with what we thought were at least 20 to 25 million people in Africa living with HIV, and the entire public health community, literally the entire public health community, with the exception of very few leaders. One of them, fortunately, being Tony Fauci, who we work closely with. Just about everybody said it's impossible to treat HIV in Africa, right? And so that nihilism would have, I think, destroyed the African economy. If that were allowed to prevail, it would have destroyed the African economy. It would have destroyed so many lives. People would not have gotten tested for HIV if there was no hope for treatment. We couldn't believe at that moment that the public health community was taking this position that would always be remembered as an epically terrible, destructive, murderous in a way decision. I used to go around saying, what, if we say that we can't treat HIV in Africa, we will forever be remembered as the generation that let 20 million people in Africa die because we thought it would be too complicated, right? And you remember, Peter, when we were saying that, and it wasn't that we were met with indifference. It wasn't that we were met with, oh, gosh, yeah, you guys are right. It's really important to treat it. What we really need to do is try to figure out a way. That's not what it was. It was anger. There was intense anger coming from leaders in the public health community. And the anger was sort of like this. They were kind of saying, who the hell do you guys think you are? If this was doable, we would have done it. What are you accusing us of, right? And so I said, okay, so when it comes to HIV in Africa, that kind of public health nihilism is just so wrongheaded in so many ways. But you can understand because it's about Africa. The thing that surprised me was public health nihilism in the UK, in the US. We just couldn't believe that people in leadership positions were giving up so quickly and saying, we just have to wait for herd immunity, right? So, herd immunity, what we seem to be witnessing is that people who've been infected are going to be, potentially reinfected. Now, people who've been vaccinated, because the vaccination is so much stronger than just having had the illness, it has such a stronger effect. I think vaccination can be transformative, but just, herd immunity, we were losing our minds. We were saying, are you kidding me? How do you know that that's going to happen? We don't know that's going to happen. How do you know there won't be new variants? So, the public health nihilism around COVID, the folks in the United States were giving up when there were 3 cases, right? They're saying we can't do contact tracing. It's too much after there were just a few cases. And so I think the most disturbing thing was that so many countries did not take this as an opportunity to build their public health system that could respond more effectively to COVID and then respond to other outbreaks and pandemics going forward. And so, we failed. We just failed miserably in so many countries in the United States, in the UK, countries in Latin America. And I hope that there will be some lessons drawn. I fear that there won't be, but let me tell you, even with the vaccine, the effort to reach hard to reach populations is going to require a better public health infrastructure. So for the students at Said who are also interested in public health, public health is going to be a growth industry, or at least it absolutely should be.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And there's so many echoes of the global AIDS movement and from our work on MDR-TB now. And I wonder, how much do you feel like history is repeating itself when we look at the issues around vaccine production and distribution and the obvious inequities in that? I mean, we look at the just tragic human catastrophe in India at this moment. And, the vaccine that I received here in the UK was probably manufactured in India, frankly. How do we address that? And are there lessons from, maybe your time in the global AIDS movement that we could bring to bear now?
Peter, one of the great privileges that I've had in my life is to have worked in so many different sectors. At last count, I'm on, I think, my seventh distinct and different career or job path. Anyway, I've had the great privilege of doing so many things, and in the last two at the World Bank and now at Global Infrastructure Partners, I'm working in the private sector. And there's just a different pace here, and it's why I was so happy to be able to do this in the Said Business School, because my sense is that the Skoll Center in the Said Business School is exactly the place where students should be able to sit back and learn. All right, so here's a problem, and the question is, what's the best way to get at it? Some you just have to be, inside the government. The government has to do things. Others, multilateral organizations can have an impact. But there are so many problems that are addressable by harnessing market forces. Right? So one of the things I've learned at the bank historically, right? So the most extraordinary achievement frankly, in the history of the world, in terms of reducing poverty, happened in Asia, but specifically China. Right? China lifted 800 million people out of poverty by embracing the market. Now, it's still not called capitalism. It's called, socialism with Chinese influences. But they embraced the market and they allowed people to get wealthy. Deng Xiaoping's famous statement, some of us will get rich first, in terms of market versus centralized command and trading with only your other, socialist partners. About that, he said, I don't care if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. So these were revolutionary sayings. And when he said them, the process was just really stunning, how quickly it happened. But what they did was they said, okay, so the government also has a role. Right? We're gonna unleash market forces, but we know that without electricity, without transport, without digital infrastructure, there's no way that our people will be able to compete. So the government will focus on investment. We'll invest in those things now. We'll do it intensively, and then by opening up to the markets outside and allowing some companies to come in, we're going to embrace the market, but in our own way. So I mean, the outcome is just stunning. And there are still places in China that are quite poor, and the government has focused intensively on those areas. So we can argue about other aspects of life in China, but on that particular note, I just don't think you can ever underemphasize how important that's been. And so what are the lessons there? The lessons are there's a role for government, but there is such an important, powerful role of harnessing the dynamic forces of the market. There's no miraculous cure there. There's not a moral compass inherent in the market. But if you can find a way to harness those forces, change can happen much more quickly. And so to get back to the question of what we learned from HIV, one of the biggest things that we had to do around HIV is we had to figure out a way to protect OECD markets for HIV drug manufacturers, while at the same time creating massive access in Africa. And at first, the pharmaceutical industry fought us every step of the way, but eventually they realized, hey, we can still make tons of money in OECD markets, and at the same time, allow some of the drugs we've made to be generically manufactured and save just many lives. So we actually solved that problem. I think it's coming up for COVID. I think this issue is coming up. Right now, I'm very involved in trying to figure out a way to create manufacturing facilities for mRNA in Africa. It's much more possible now than it's ever been before. And so I think that's the direction we have to go. We really, India is such an important manufacturer of pharmaceuticals and even of vaccines, but they have such a big problem on their own. It's going to be very hard for them to not divert those vaccines for their own population. So I think we have to create manufacturing capacity. And compared to 20 years ago, there are many countries in Africa that could potentially do it. And so I think that's what we're looking at. And also, by the way, I think that the vaccine manufacturing in Africa can be commercially viable. I think we can find both equity investors and debt investors for robust manufacturing capacity in Africa. It's not a solution we would have thought of. Well, we thought of it, but we just took it off the table 20 years ago. But it's very much on the table today.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the demand is there, and all the arguments for inaction echo the same things we heard, 20, 25 years ago with AIDS, that it's too complicated, it's too expensive, it's not possible. And I think you provided some great examples of how we can reimagine and sometimes re-engineer markets to harness the power of the private sector and the power of business to actually address issues of equity and access. And that's, I think, been the kind of tension that's animated a lot of your career. Looking ahead a little bit, you ran the World Bank Group, one of the more important multilateral institutions, which, these are the kinds of institutions that we would expect would be the ones who are out front and responding to, to global issues and global crises. Obviously, there's been a real challenge. A lot of countries, because this, unlike Ebola, for example, affected everybody, countries largely retreated inward, and we haven't seen that kind of solidarity and cooperation that we need. Is it possible? I mean, looking ahead to the next pandemic, to the climate crisis, are our systems of governments at the sort of global and national levels at all fit for purpose, or do we need to dramatically reimagine governance systems to be ready for what comes next?
Well, Peter, that's a perennial question, right? So, I think I in my own mind, I counted how many times I've been either a part of a group or part of a discussion on, asking the question, is WHO fit for purpose? And it's at least 7 different occasions in my lifetime where
I'm in one right now.
where that discussions happened, and frankly, there hasn't been much change, right? And the things I've learned are things like the position of the U.S. government is always extremely important. Now increasingly the position of the Chinese government is important. The position of the EU, but both of those are much less important than the position of the U.S. government. So when the U.S. government was actively sabotaging WHO, it just, I had felt so badly for Tedros and the team at WHO, because it's just very hard for them to have the impact that they need to have when that happens. So, the system is what it is, and the powerful countries still run that system. And if the U.S. backs out, then it's difficult. And when I was at the World Bank, the Trump administration actually supported the World Bank, very powerfully. We got a capital increase that frankly no one expected. I can, sometime, Peter, you and I over a beer, I'll tell you that story. But it was very complicated, very difficult. But we were able to get it. I tell you, I think that from a time when what WHO said was law and everybody listened, from a time when the World Bank was the biggest lender by far, and we talked of the problem of absorption capacity. There's not enough absorption capacity for the money we already have. The world has changed completely. So even the World Bank is now more than triple the size when I started. And again, thanks a lot go to the fact that we were able to get the capital increase and also the emergency situation. But those institutions will continue, and they have an important role. But I think that your students at the Said Business School, there are other things that they can think about that could have a huge impact. The reason I left the World Bank Group is because I came to understand that there was just no way that the system, the World Banks, the multilateral banks, the aid infrastructure, was able to support the demand for basic infrastructure in emerging markets. And I came to understand that that the flow of private capital was absolutely critical if we were going to help countries meet the aspirations of their people. Right? So that's why I left. It's hard. It's really hard to convince investors. You know, someone mentioned Ontario Teachers. It's also the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund is one of the largest investors in the world. And even though the Ontario teachers themselves may really want, you know, the pension fund to invest in impact and invest in ESG, you know, the Ontario teachers have a fiduciary responsibility to be able to pay pensions as people age. And so, you know, the strong sense is that investing in emerging market infrastructure is too risky, right? So, you know, we have to solve these kinds of problems. I'm trying to do it in the area of emerging market infrastructure. But if every solution is start an NGO, right? I think what you'll see is like what we saw in Haiti, Peter. You remember after the earthquake, Haiti had more NGOs per capita than in any other country in the world, except for maybe India. I forget where it was, but it was one of the highest NGO per capita in the world. And after the earthquake, 99% of them were completely inactive. There was nothing they could do to help. They were really shut down. So I don't think that the proliferation of NGOs is the solution. And you know, for your students, I'd say it very directly. You know, you got to ask yourself, who am I doing this for, right? And so, you know, so many NGOs, I see them and it's like, oh, okay, so are you applying for grad school? Are you applying for, you know, a prize? It's about them as opposed to saying, well, you know, how could this actually have an impact on the system in a deep and profound way? That's much harder than starting an NGO.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's not.
Yeah.
And it's not just about NGOs. It also speaks to a comment you made earlier when we were talking with the group with the Nigeria project about the importance of being there, the importance of proximity, the importance of bottom-up work and embeddedness within communities. And we have to think about the top-down nature of change, but also really importantly, the bottom-up, and systems don't shift and mindsets don't shift without that. Jim, in the time we have left, I want to maybe try to ask two more questions. And I apologize to those of you who sent in questions. I have too many devices and I can't quite figure out the tech. So you'll just have to be stuck with mine. Jim, I want to talk about leadership. We touched briefly on the really interesting lens the pandemic has put on political leadership and some of the surprises there. We talk a lot in this program about systems leadership, those who can, really inspire and build coalitions for change. And that often means bringing lots of different actors, often with competing views and competing incentives and entrenched power structures to bear. This is something that you've done throughout your career, whether that was the disruption of Partners in Health and ultimately your work at 3x5 at WHO, to the really bold vision that you put forward at the World Bank. So could you talk a little bit about what are the kind of traits or skills that are required for leaders to really be able to shift systems?
So Peter, you know this. I've had leadership coaches, throughout my career, and my current leadership coach I've had for 12 years now. I met him at Dartmouth, and he is in fact the most famous leadership coach in the world, a guy named Marshall Goldsmith. Right? And I'd had a few coaches before that, but there was nothing like working with Marshall, because what Marshall does is he does the full 360 analysis of how people see you, of how people react to you. And then he just gives it to you right between the eyes. And it's a very straightforward process. He says, okay, here's what your people said. And the question for you is, do you want to get better or not? And there's no leader that gets a perfect score. If you have a really good coach, the coach will tease out information about how people are responding to you. And so, I don't think that there's any specific kinds of traits. You kind of have to go with what you got, right? But the one thing you've got to do is you have to be humble enough to go through coaching, right? There's if you want to read a great article about this, Atul Gawande in the New Yorker wrote about getting a coach for doing surgery. And Peter, you know this, once we become fully trained physicians, we don't really have coaches anymore, right? You get a lot of coaching when you're a resident and a fellow. You don't get much coaching after that. So when Atul brought in a coach to help him with a surgery, the senior surgeon said, "We don't do this. You're a fully trained physician, Atul, and why would I do this?" He came in and watched Atul do a surgery. And Atul's a very good surgeon. And he said, "Atul, you're a fantastic surgeon, but here are 16 things I saw that you might want to think about."
Wow.
Atul's numbers got better. Numbers got better. Peter, you know Atul well. He measures everything, and his numbers got better. And so the question he asked was, if Roger Federer, the greatest tennis player in history, arguably, has a coach, why don't I have a coach, right? And so Marshall Goldsmith specifically, he says, "I help high-achieving people do even better." And so, I know you teach leadership at the Said School. I think this is really, really important. I think that, making yourself humble enough to really see how it is that you come off to others, right? And, I've had experiences where Marshall gives me feedback and I said, "Oh my God, I was thinking that, but I was sure that I did nothing to give anyone the sense that I was thinking that." And of course, they all picked it up right away, right? So take advantage of coaching. Now, there's a lot of snake oil in that world, I have to tell you. But if you find a good, thoughtful coach, oh my goodness, it's the most humbling experience you can have. But it's also how you get better. So just think about it this way. Life is about continue to challenge yourself to get better. And you've got to have somebody who will just give it to you right between the eyes on a consistent basis.
Great advice. And, humility and a willingness to constantly learn and change is so important. Jim, last thing, and you've already given some really great advice to our students. Not only our students, here in Oxford who've been part of this program, but we've got students that we work with all around the world through Map the System who are all deeply committed to creating positive change in the world. Any final parting words of advice for them today?
I first of all, I do this a lot when I talk to students. I have to apologize. I mean, we're leaving you guys a troubled world, and we failed in so many ways. We failed on climate change. We failed on pandemics. We failed in terms of creating a world where there's more of a sense that that the fate of all of us. The fate of every one of us is related to the fate of all of us. We haven't done well in that regard. And so what I would say is don't use our tools. Certainly don't use our tools exclusively. Starting an NGO was our tool, right? You guys do things differently. You guys start chat groups. You do GoFundMes. You do things online. Think about how your generation's solutions could be transformative in, unfortunately, tackling the problems that our generation has left you. And I wouldn't have said this 20 years ago. Peter, you knew me 20 years ago. I wouldn't have said this 20 years ago. There's no magical, there's nothing magical about private sector and about harnessing the right incentives. Establishing the right incentives. There's no magic about it, but it moves more quickly. It moves more quickly. And there are a lot of bad things that happen, in the market. But if you can get market mechanisms moving in the right direction for sustainability, for global health, don't just go to our solution, which is start an NGO or join the World Bank or join WHO. Yeah, those are all fine. If that fits your personality, if you love being there, do that, right? But think about the way you communicate. Think about the way things get done now. Bring those ideas and bring those kinds of solutions to these just horrific problems that now we're leaving to you.
Jim, thank you so much for dropping some wisdom today, for sharing your thoughts, and of course for being a part of this event. We're not done with you yet because you judges are returning, but please everyone give Jim a round of virtual applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
I think our other judges are back, and so now's the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time, just before we close, to announce our winners. So I'm going to turn it over to Zainab to welcome our judges and bring it home.
Thanks, Peter. And yes, welcome back to our judges. I hope everyone today has really seen the creativity as well as the quality of the work of our MBA students have demonstrated in GOTO this year. So I want to once again congratulate all of our finalist teams. So as Peter said, the moment we've all been waiting for, the prizes. And what's great about GOTO, no one walks away empty-handed. So let's just do a recap of the prizes that are available. So the 4th place award carries a £500 prize. 3rd place, we have £1,500 for the winning team. The runner-up will have £3,000, and the winner of the GOTO Summit receives £6,000. And the Audience Choice Awards, yes, there is power with the people here. The Audience Choice Award carries a amount of £1,500 as well. So with that, I will welcome Dr. Kim and Tariq and Mohammed back to announce our winners and to offer a bit of their own reflections on each of the projects. So, yes.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. And should I also be announcing at this point okay. So I just want to say a real genuine thank you for this opportunity to hear your presentations and be with you in this space. I just saw a lot of ambition, a true desire to take on the global threats and see the opportunities in the world. I saw a lot of time, energy, passion, empathy, being able to hear live coaching and feedback in the moment, just as Dr. Kim was talking about. That's never easy to do, and I really appreciate that. And also, just as Dr. Kim was talking about, doing things differently, some desire to innovate and try and change things. So I just have a lot of admiration for you guys and the spirit and the energy that you'll be bringing here, but also in your careers after Oxford. So just a genuine thanks for all that. And I have the pleasure of announcing, by the way, it was really hard. It was actually very hard deliberation. And it was actually, we're in a challenging position of having to choose among 4 pretty amazing projects here. So I will be announcing number 4, which is Elevate Raya. Woo! And I will turn it over to Jim, who I think will be announcing the next candidate.
Actually, you guys should keep going because I wasn't able to listen to the entire discussion. I was, with Peter. So you guys go through all of them.
I'll pass it over to Mohammed then to announce number 3.
Number 3. I'm not sure that because I thought Jim was looking at number 3.
Yes, so I can announce the 3rd place, and then maybe I'll just ask Dr. Kim to just say a few remarks. So the 3rd place goes to WOW, and with the Wellness Project in Canada, and I will just ask Dr. Kim to just say a few remarks on that.
So I was a big fan of WOW. I thought you guys had a very good plan, and that the likelihood of you actually changing outcomes was higher, frankly, than the other groups. On the other hand, it's much easier to do a project like this in Toronto than it is in northern Nigeria, right? So I certainly understand why it was 3rd, but know that I'm a big fan of the way that you've thought about it. And I think that the chance for getting market forces going in your favor in making a big impact on isolation are good. So don't give up. And just know that I, in fact, was your fan, and I had you higher on my list.
Thanks, Dr. Kim. Muhammad, over to you.
Thank you very much. So let me also echo Teresa's comments. I thought that all the presentations were of a very, very high quality. A lot of hard work had gone into them. All of you identified the problems very well, were well articulated. And I think that the solutions you offered were really interesting ones to explore and engage with. I think that after your work here, you will all become change makers. And I think that hopefully with your intervention, the world will certainly be a better place. So thank you very much for all that you have put in. For the panel, I guess climate change is a major problem. It's a major problem in the sense that if we don't address it now, humanity will be impacted with that, and all of you young people will be impacted with that significantly. As you know, Professor Yunus, the Nobel Prize winner for his work on microfinance, articulated in his book that a net zero carbon emissions position is the precursor to having zero unemployment and zero poverty. In getting to a zero carbon emissions problem, I think that plastics have a huge contribution to make, both in terms of where we are today and how we address it so that we can get to net zero in the shortest time possible. What we liked very much about the presentation was that it offered a solution in terms of we cannot do without plastic. It is here to stay, but meanwhile, how do we contain its proliferation by looking at recycling while alternates to plastics are invented. So it was an understanding that, look, it is what it is, we have to address it, and how best do we address it? And the solution to create a global database, share the findings with all the stakeholders and all the ecosystem is a good one, because it's only through open collaboration that we will that change will happen in the way that we want. And so I think that it's a great project, and I love the comments about how the problem is global, but the solution that is being offered is localized. And the carrot and stick approach that you need to have incentives alongside enforcements. So with that, I would say drastic plastic is the choice for the winner today. Well done.
Well done, everyone. And Teresa.
I will be announcing our runner-up, but I also acknowledge I neglected to add my comments on why I thought Elevate Rye was so great. So I'll just give a quick couple comments about that. With Elevate Rye, we saw you guys take on a really challenging problem, right? Something that really was at the root of so much else of what is there, which is addressing cultural norms. And that is so hard. The ambition, the desire to do better, and recognizing that what you can do when you are helping a woman is not only about her gaining financial success, but it improves outcomes for her family, for her children, for next generations. And so just so appreciate the ambition and the desire there. So I wanted to shout that out. Before I do, I'm happy to announce our runner-up today, which is #EducateOurGirls. I was a girl once myself, and I very much appreciate the need to educate girls around the world. Yeah, educating girls is not just, I think it was Mohammed that said, when you educate a girl, it's not just about educating a girl, it's about educating her whole family. It's actually even more than that. Girls' education has been shown to be a contributor to reducing climate change. And while we're talking about global threats and interconnected problems, this is a really huge issue and a big one, and it has a lot of opportunities to do a lot of great good in the world. And I think what we really appreciated from you guys was just the thoughtfulness in your approach and thinking through the solutions, what would be particularly effective and feasible, balancing the ambition and the impact and what's actually possible. So congratulations to #EducateOurGirls.
Thank you, Teresa. Congratulations to all of you. And we will we'll do our final award, which is the Audience Choice Award. And we will see what the results from the Mentimeter are telling us.
Wow.
Wow, congratulations. Team 2, Elevate Raya, is the Audience Choice winner. Thank you, everyone who voted. Thank you again to all of the teams and all the hard work that you put into this and your dedication to this work. Peter, I will turn it over to you to close.
Thanks, everyone. I love that bit of last-minute drama. Congratulations to everybody, but that was exciting. So well done, audience. Well done, judges. Well done to to all of you colleagues who competed today. This has been just such a great event. We learned a lot from you. One of the things that I love about doing GOTO is it just is a chance to get smarter around so many different things, and really being driven by your passions is great. So I want to thank you. Before closing, I just need to rattle off a few thank yous. There's so many people who are involved in making GOTO happen and making this event happen. There are 24 faculty who are part of this program, tutoring and helping in many other ways. We've had dozens of partners who contributed to GOTO Week to help you get smarter around the industries and issues you were talking about. I want to thank Fraser Boyd, Bethan Morris, and David Pierce in the projects office who made all of this happen. Tom Madden and the entire AV and ODM team for pulling off an event with 40 different speakers, as well as Jonathan Patterson, many other people who made this all possible. We're grateful to our alumni who contribute in many ways, to our many partners, the Skoll Foundation, the Mercy Foundation, two of many, and to all of you for caring enough to show up today and being a part of this. The work ahead of us, couldn't be more urgent and couldn't be more important. And I think we need to raise our ambitions, think outside the box, and, as Jim said, cast away some of those old models and build something new. So with that, I'll leave you. Sorry that we went a few minutes over, but thank you very much. This will be available for viewing later, so please do share it with your friends and your family, and come see us again soon. Bye, everyone.